The legend of the Northland. Let us read this, then we'll know about the poet. This poem narrates the legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed. Before we understand line-wise about the poet expression connecting to the legend, let us know about the poet. PHOEBE CARY was an American poet and writer known for her sentimental and lyrical poetry. She collaborated with her sister Alice and became prominent in 19th century American literary circles. Away, away in Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. So in these two lines, away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, the poetess describes the harsh and cold Northland where daylight is short. It describes about the the vivid description of the snowy land of Northland. The poetic device that the poet had used here is of imagery, setting the scene with a vivid description. And the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Here, the poet describes that the nights are so extended that the people cannot sleep through them, and the poetic device used in this too is of hyperbole, emphasizing the severity of long nights, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny, furry clothes. In these two lines, the poet says that reindeer are used to pull sledges during snowy conditions, and the poetic device used in these two stanzas is of imagery depicting the local customs and environment. And the children look like bears and cubs in their funny furry clothes. Here, the poet tells that children are dressed in warm, furry clothes that make them resemble like bear cubs, their appearance. So the poetic device here it is used, okay, is of simile, comparing children to bear cubs to convey their appearance. Then tell them a curious story. I don't believe this true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Here in these two lines, the poet tells a curious story connecting doubt about truth. And the poetic device we can say is of foreshadowing that she used, indicating that the story more symbolic than factual. And yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Here the poet, despite doubts about its truth, the story holds a valuable lesson, and the poetic device is used is of direct address, engaging the audience to pay attention now. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it, preaching just as he did, you know. Here in this stanza, the poetess tells that Saint Peter was living on the earth during his time and traveling around for preaching, and was known for his religious preaching. So the poetic device that the poet has used here is of historical references in these two lines, setting the story in the past time. And in these two lines, the poet had used the poetic device of repetition that reinforces Saint Peter's role. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. The poet tells that Saint Peter arrives at a cottage while traveling, where he found that a woman was baking cakes in the cottage. And the poetic device she used here is of imagery, that means depicting Saint Peter's journey and travel in these two lines. And second device the poetess had used is of again of imagery in these two lines where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the earth, highlighting highlighting or showing, illustrating the domestic scene. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. The poet describes here, the poetist, okay, describes here that Saint Peter was feeling weak from fasting, hunger, and asked the woman for a cake. Uh, and Saint Peter had requested also, okay, Saint Peter had requested for giving one cake from the woman's batch, or you can say stock. And the poetic device the poetess has used here is of imagery, highlighting Saint Peter's hunger, and second one is of direct speech as a poetic device. You can say showing Saint Peter's request. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. So here in this stanza, the poet tells that the woman bakes a very small cake but decides it's still too large to give away. So she considers the cake too large to part with, not to give. That means, okay. And the poetic device the poet had used here is of repetition, emphasizing the woman hesitation, and internal conflict, showing her reluctance, not forgiving. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked when she turned it over as as large as the first had done. Here in this stanza, the poet tells that she tries to make an even smaller cake. The smaller cake still seems too large to give away. And the poetic device here again, it is used of repetition, highlighting her continued reluctance. And second poetic device that is used in this stanza is of irony, emphasizing the futility of her efforts. Then she took a tiny scrap of duck and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. Here the tells that the lady uses a tiny bit of duck to make a wafer thin cake. Even that wafer thin cake is too precious for her to give away. And the poetic device the poet had used is of imagery and hyperbole. Okay, here in this two stanza, it is used of imagery. That means illustrating the uh, minuscule size of the cake. And here in this two stanza, the poet had used the poetic device of hyperbole, emphasizing her greed, showing her greed. For she said, my cake seem too small when I eat of are yet too large to give away, so she put them on the shelf. Here in this stanza, the poet says that the lady realizes that each cake seems too large for others. And the lady decides not to give any cakes away and puts them aside. So the poetic device used here is of rationalization, showing her self-justification, and second poetic device that the poetess had used here is of her selfishness. Selfishness. Then good saint grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman enough to provoke a saint. In this stanza, the poet says that Saint Peter becomes very angry due to his hunger and the woman's selfishness. The woman's behavior was enough to anger even a saint. And the poetic device used in this part, okay, is of personification illustrating Saint Peter's frustration. And second poetic device used in this stanza is of hyperbole, emphasizing the extremity of the situation. And he said, you are far too selfish in a human form to have both shelter and fire to keep you warm. So the poet describes in this stanza that Saint Peter condemns her for her selfishness and unworthiness to remain as human in this world. Saint Peter highlights the comforts she enjoys while being selfish. So the poetic device used here is of direct speech conveying the curse, and second poetic device used here is of contrast between her comfort and her behavior. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring all day in the hard day dry wood. The poet further describes the lady lady is cursed to live like a bird, finding minimal food by pecking. She must peck at wood all day. So the poetic device used metaphor comparing her new life to that of bird, and second poetic device used here is of repetition, emphasizing the monotony and difficulty of her new life. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Here in this stanza, the poet says that the lady flies out of the chimney, transforming, that means into a woodpecker, and the woman becomes finally a bird and fulfilling the curse. So the poetic device here it is used is of imagery. In the first two lines is of imagery, and that means depicting her transformation. And the second poetic device in these two lines is of transformation, making her new identity. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was the same, but all the rest of were burnt black as a coal in the. So finally, what is here? The poet is describing about the lady that she retains a scarlet cap from her human life. That means shed it away. Okay, she shedded a scarlet cap from her human life, and her other clothes are burnt and blackened. So the poetic device here it is used is of symbolism and imagery. So first two lines is of symbolism, the cap representing her wife, and imagery is used, okay, poetic device of imagery showing the damage to her clothes. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and borrowing for food. So finally, in this last stanza, the poet concludes that uh, the woodpecker can still be seen in the woods by schoolboys, and she continues to live in the trees pecking for food as punishment. Finally, we end up and the poetic device here is of imagery and repetition and repetition. Imagery in these two lines used by the poet that connecting the legend to the real observation, and repetition emphasizing her endless labor. So let us read finally little bit this also. A ballad is a song narrating a story in short stanza. Ballads are a part of folk culture or popular and are passed on orally from one generation the next. A legend of the Northland ballad. So remember, it is a ballad. So to conclude, poet, let us sum up that this poem, this poem, the poet tells us about the story connecting to the Northland. In North in the Northland, a tale is told about a selfish woman who, while baking cakes, refuses to give any away to Saint Peter despite his hunger. Angry at her stinginess, Saint Peter curses her to live as a woodpecker, pecking for food all day. She retains a scarlet cap from her former life, but her clothes are burnt black. Now she lives in the trees, constantly searching for food as a punishment for her greed. So, what moral lesson we learn from this? The moral lesson that the poem is teaching us is that selfishness and lack of generosity can lead to one's downfall and punishment. Selfishness and lack of generosity can lead to one's downfall and punishment. So, thank you for spending your time. Please read and revise yourself and enjoy the poem about a legend of the Northland written by PHOEBE CARY. So, thank you. We'll meet with next